This is a weird little play. It's fun, sure, but it's weird. Twelfth Night is relatively late comedy for Shakespeare, 1601. Most of his comedies were written in the early part of his career. This one's written right around the same time as Hamlet. So it has some of those marks of a more refined style we find in those famous tragedies. Things like the wise fool who somehow sees through everything that's going on. It can be an ironic voice of reason, like we'll see in something later like King Lear. But it also has all the really familiar elements of Shakespeare's earlier, more fun comedies. Twins, mistaken identity, cross-dressing, gender confusion, all that stuff. Here's the basic plot. I got this new whiteboard. It's remarkable. Viola, right, she's shipwrecked, and so for some reason decides to dress up like a boy, like you do, and go work for the local duke. And then, apropos of nothing, she's tasked with declaring the duke's love for some rich chick. But then Olivia is like, oh, I'm not into the duke, but bro. And falls in love with him immediately. You know, just like real life. Then Viola, dead name, Cesario now, is like, well, I kind of love the Duke. And the Duke is like, maybe I loved you too, but maybe I'll murder you. And then Sebastian is there. Sebastian is Cesario's brother, who she thought was dead, but now is in town for some reason. And Sebastian marries Olivia because Olivia thought he was Cesario. And for a second, she's like, what? Two hot dudes I'm married to?
Most wonderful.
But then Cesario's like, nah, I'm a chick. And Orsino's like, aw, dude, you're a chick, let's get married. But then Malvolio is there, so there's no proof Viola's a girl, and of course, you already know this, Viola is being played by a male actor. Women weren't allowed on the English stage for another 60 years or so. So all the female parts will be played by adolescent boys. So it's a dude playing a chick, playing a dude, to play a chick who's played by another dude, for another dude playing a dude who's a player. It's weird, it's a weird little play. So what's going on here? To get a window into the play, it might help us a little to get a quick run at what Shakespearean comedy is. When we start dealing with genre, we're really dealing with expectations. Things like tropes or stock characters or plot conventions and the like are all caught up in service to fulfilling what an audience expects to see. I think you already understand this intuitively just from being alive in a media-saturated era like ours. When you go see a horror movie, you expect a jump scare. When you go see science fiction, you expect global cityscapes and near-magical technologies. When you watch a romantic comedy, you expect dopey and adorable characters and near-legendary levels of thirst. Shakespeare's audience was the same. When they heard a play was a comedy, they would know what they were getting into. This means that genre isn't like a concrete, unchanging set of tropes or conventions, but rather a fluid and dynamic story container that evolves through a collision between artistic production and audience reception. This also means that when we study genre in this historical sense, we're really studying the conditions that give these expectations rise. For the Elizabethan stage, there are a few standard conventions. Setting is a big one. Comedies in this era all took place in an idealized urban setting, usually in the Mediterranean, a setting from classical myth or literature, certainly not foggy, stinky, cold, rainy London. Foreign, not mythical, a place you'd want to go on vacation. Importantly, also, the comedy doesn't take place in the royal court, but in the public square. All the same, there'll be some kind of aristocracy involved, a count or a duke or a lord or something. So in the setting, we have a juxtaposition of the high, the literary, idealized, tightly regulated, with the low, markets, public squares, places where manners would be far less restricted. The types of characters used in a comedy follow the same pattern. You usually have a hero, a kind of everyman figure, not royalty, but has some independent wealth, a synthesis of high and low. The events of the comedy will most often make the hero start off displaced. He's not in his own hometown. He has means and wit and skill enough, but he doesn't have name recognition. No one knows him. With the hero, we also get the beloved. This character will often share lines with the hero, where they split up poetic forms between the two of them, so one person sets up the rhyme and the other person completes it, kind of like finishing each other's sentences. The beloved will also share a lot of clever banter with the hero, showing she's an intellectual match for him. The hero is most often accompanied by a servant, usually one far more clever and prone to getting himself into fights. This character is usually big on puns and jokes, has a lot of pratfalls, and is usually part of some kind of deceptive scheme to trick the other characters. Rounding out the cast, we get some kind of political power or authority figure. Here's where the nobility comes in. But this figure is usually peripheral and uninvolved in the events of the plot. Finally, in most plays, we find a madman, and in most cases, this person is mistaken for being mad. Now already you can see Twelfth Night has a lot of differences from the standard conventions, but they're still in place. Our hero, Cesario, is also in some sense the beloved Viola. The Duke, Orsino, isn't just a background character that serves as a reminder of legitimate authority, but is really an essential aspect of the play itself. The servant, in this case split between Feste and Sir Toby, isn't involved with the hero, but with Viola, the other beloved, who herself plays a far more proactive role than in most cases. So what gives Shakespeare the freedom to really stretch these expectations is his strong adherence to the most fundamental aspect of a comedy, the plot. Elizabethan comic plots always revolve around issues of mistaken identity, unrequited love, but most importantly, the comic plot is all about reconciliation. The comic plot is dialectic in nature. It has 3 beats, and each build from and respond to the previous. We start with stasis, the status quo. Everything's in its place, everything's fine, or at least we think it's fine. Really, the hallmark of the status quo is that everything is not fine, but we honestly don't know any better, so we accept the situation even if it's not great. But then something happens, antithesis, the negation of the status quo. Something comes along to throw everything into confusion. Lovers are separated, heroes are thrown into unfamiliar territory or need to go into hiding. There's tension, misunderstanding. The action of the plot then is all about problem solving, driven by what the Greeks would call dianoia, or thinking. In the end, though, we finally come to a synthesis. The negation of the status quo is overcome, and the characters all come back into harmony, but now in a new and fully realized way. This is why Shakespearean comedy always ends in marriage. Marriage is the ultimate expression of reconciliation, the coming together of the separated lovers into a complete unity to form a new entity, the family. The status quo then isn't restored, it's rewritten, but simply it's a happy ending. This is all pretty obvious in Twelfth Night. Viola Cesario sums it up well. As I am a man, my state is desperate for my master's love. As I am woman, now alas the day, what thriftless sigh shall poor Olivia breathe? O time, thou must untangle this, not I. It is too hard a knot for me to untie. Here we see that they identify as both man and woman, negating this simple gender binary insisted on by the status quo, and then reasons that the situation is far too complex to resolve on her own. Time has to unravel this knot. So the reconciliation in this play has got something to do with one's place in time, with history, we might say. Let's look at a couple of main characters and see how this pans out. We know already how this goes for Viola. As the central character of the play, her story resolves with a reconciliation with her brother, her family identity, her past, with her gender, her personal identity, or her present, and with dreamy Orsino, her future. That one's obvious, but let's consider how reconciliation happens with some less obvious characters. Orsino, Olivia, and Malvolio. Modern critics and readers are really interested with this play for its exploration of gender. That should come as no surprise to anyone paying attention. The goal of literary criticism is to apply the meaning of a text toward a specific current issue. In this, Orsino's sexual identity has become a major part of the conversation. Is Orsino gay? That's actually a really complex question. On the one hand, our way of merging personal identity with sexual desire wouldn't make much sense in the 17th century. Not because homosexual desire would have been unknown to them, people have always experienced same-sex desire, but as to whether that desire would become part of a complex of gender performance, personal identity, sexual activity, and social representation we moderns group together in the larger idea of queerness, that's not something your average 17th century yeoman's gonna get. So does Orsino then love Cesario? I think the answer is yes. He says he has unclasped the book of his secret soul to him. The other servants comment too on the unusually close relationship that's developed between Cesario and the Duke. Orsino recognizes that Cesario is a charming dude, so much so that he sends him to win Olivia for him. By the way, the fact that he still wants to wed Olivia is not evidence that he doesn't also love Cesario. But here's the real ringer, I think. At the end of the play, Cesario is revealed to be Viola, a woman. And immediately the Duke is like, heck yes, let's get married. That's an odd thing to drop on someone you don't have romantic feelings for. So how is this a reconciliation? Well, the way I see it, Orsino isn't gay. Like I said, people knew what same-sex attraction was, and if they themselves didn't experience it, they knew other people that did, and honestly, it usually didn't go well from them. It's not like we can expect Elizabethans, the same era that thought women were literally less human and leeches cured a headache, to be all woke on gay rights all of a sudden. But now imagine the spot this puts Duke Orsino in. He's literally the main authority of Illyria. The whole region is counting on this guy to marry well and produce offspring. The stability of the entire country depends on it. And now, heck, I'm in love with the dude. This has got to be a really confusing time for the Duke. He's not gay, but he loves another man. And then, what? You're a girl? Oh, thank God, let's get married. This is why it's really important, too. They have to go get Viola's female clothes, the woman's weeds she hid with the sea captain in Act 1. It's not for him, for the Duke. It's so that everyone else can see, oh yeah, Orsino's marrying a woman. That's why it also doesn't matter that we never have a scene with Cesario and Viola dress at the end. For Orsino, it literally doesn't matter. It's the person that he loves. Okay, but that gives us another problem. Olivia. Olivia has the opposite problem. She's fallen in love with Cesario not because of his looks or his social position, but because of his personality. After their first meeting, Olivia pines, I'll be sworn thou art a gentleman. Thy tongue, thy face, thy limbs, actions, and spirit do give thee a fivefold blazon. Basically, Cesario is the total package. He looks good, sure, but his actions and spirit also attest to his nobility and manhood. And why not? Cesario's got this breezy confidence when he's talking with Olivia. He's smart, quick-witted, deeply poetic, funny, and has the easygoing nonchalance of a dude who has no need to win the affections of a rich and powerful woman. So in other words, the complete opposite of Orsino. And then Sebastian comes along. Same face, but different guy. And before you know it, they're rushing off to get married. It's everything Olivia always wanted, except not really. Then the penny drops. Olivia, you're not married to the person you love. In fact, that person doesn't even exist. Instead, you're married to this complete stranger. How is this reconciliation? What do we do with this? Well, it's not entirely satisfying, but it might help to get a little bit of background in view. This play was written in 1601, probably spring of 1601. Now, during this time, London isn't the most hygienic place you're going to find. Disease swept through pretty regularly. The Globe Theatre, where many of Shakespeare's plays are performed between 1599 and 1613 when it burned down, was closed for a grand total of nearly 80 months due to plague outbreaks and quarantine. That's literally half the time. In 1593, there had been a major plague outbreak in London that led to the deaths of about 10,000 people. There had been another plague outbreak in 1563, and there would be another one coming in 1603. All told, it decreased the population by about 30% in England in the period. That's almost 1 million deaths. What's all this got to do with Olivia? Well, when she first finds herself swooning over Cesario, she asks herself, even so quickly may one catch the plague. This isn't the only association the play makes between love and plague, though it is the most obvious one. At the same time, all the supporting characters, Maria, Toby, Feste, the Duke, even Cesario, comment on the tragic waste it would be if Olivia died without having children. This isn't mere misogyny at work. No, it's something far more simple. The population is down. There's this kind of funny phenomenon you can track by looking at church records of burials and baptisms. Bumper years and burials precede bumper years and baptisms, almost like clockwork. After a bunch of people die, a whole bunch of other people start having babies. Sorry, Olivia, marriage in this context isn't for love. Who you love simply doesn't matter. Marriage is for babies. Hey, that's kind of gross. What gives? On the one hand, Orsino gets to find out that marriage is about being with the person that you love. On the other hand, Olivia doesn't get to marry the person that she loves. And it's really, in the end, for the same reason. Social expectations. It's all authorized by cultural power. We have this point made about marriage and love with Cesario and Orsino, and then the complete negation of that point with Olivia. It's like there are two cultures at war in here. One that wants to find the loopholes in these social expectations to make them a little bit more livable for real people, and the other one that insists they must be maintained so that we can have social stability. There's one more move here, and I think it comes with Malvolio. Malvolio is no fun. That's actually the fun of this character. Really, from the start, audiences took the Malvolio subplot to be one of the most memorable elements of this play. There's an early stage version even that changed the title of the play to Malvolio. There's something really satisfying about seeing a person like this get their comeuppance, right? But we shouldn't get too caught up in revenge fantasies. At the end of the play, it turns out everything depends on Malvolio. Viola has been revealed, all has come to light, but we can't have a marriage until we get the proof. Viola says, the captain did bring me first on shore hath my maid's garments. He upon some action is now in durance at Malvolio's suit. This means that only Malvolio can drop whatever charges he's locked up the captain for. But Malvolio's in no mood to be gracious and help the others out. He's just been humiliated by Toby and Festi. I can imagine a sequel to this play, 13th Night, Malvolio's Revenge. That would just be like a tragic bloodbath. All that is to say, really, at the end, all of the reconciliation depends on Malvolio. Why is that? There's this throwaway line Mariah says to the gang talking about Malvolio. They're all drinking and reveling well into the night, and then Malvolio comes in and yells at them like dad at a sleepover. You kids, keep it down! And then they all start after he leaves. This is Act 2, Scene 3. Sir Toby says, possess us, tell us something of him. The Mariah says, marry, sir, sometimes he's a kind of Puritan. So you've got to understand, England in the period was rife with sectarian violence. This is just a few decades after Henry VIII, that's Queen Elizabeth's dad, converted the whole country to Protestantism. Now look, just because the king says your country is now Protestant, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden everyone's Protestant. There are a lot of upset Catholics. After Henry dies, his son Edward keeps the country Protestant, but then he dies, and Mary, his sister, becomes monarch. Here's the rub, Mary's a Catholic, so now the whole country becomes Catholic again. But look, you don't just become Catholic because the Queen is. Now we have a lot of upset Protestants. You might know Mary by her nickname, Bloody Mary, so called because she's really into torturing people who aren't cool with being Catholic. But then she dies and Elizabeth takes over, Protestant Elizabeth, and the whole country's Protestant again. It's actually pretty exhausting. Elizabeth's main job is to make sure all this Protestant Catholic ping pong doesn't rip the country apart. She does this in a really smart way by letting the Church of England become something like a via media between Catholics and Protestants. They keep all the liturgy and rituals of Catholicism, but the Protestant authority structure, so no pope. This works for everyone but the extremes on either side, the ultra-Catholic, the Jesuits, and the ultra-Protestant, the Puritans. Now the Puritans are notorious for being absolutely no fun. No drinking, no dancing, and definitely no theater. I mean, that's not really fair. These guys were often the butt of every joke, but they had deep convictions against the things they saw as sinful or gratuitous. They were known for wearing black, being stern, also being incredibly enthusiastic. These were the kind of guys that would need scriptural warrant for literally everything they did, but they would also read the Bible like it was a secret coded letter written specifically for them. Not unlike the way Malvolio reads the letter from Olivia. The Puritans were often social outcasts, very judgmental of the fallen world, but also very invested in trying to reshape society to fit the model of their very strict morality. About 50 years after this play, there's a civil war in England, and for 11 years the Puritans will be in complete control. It's kind of a low point in English history. In a lot of ways, Malvolio seems like a Puritan, but I think it's important to point out that Mariah says he's sometimes a kind of Puritan, and then walks that back a little in her next line. The devil of a Puritan he is, or anything consistent, but a time pleaser. So, not a Puritan, not consistently, only when it benefits him. He's an affectioned ass that cons state without book and utters it by great swaths. So dude quotes the Bible more than he reads it. So he's not really a Puritan, he's a charlatan. He uses Puritan ethics to make people feel guilty, but also because he thinks it gives him social advancement. I mean, it's pretty clear he doesn't really believe any of that Puritan stuff. Look how quickly he abandons it all as soon as he thinks he's got a shot with Olivia. He shows up wearing yellow stockings, something those black-wearing Puritans wouldn't be caught dead in. Incidentally, that trick to get Malvolio to wear cross-gartered yellow stockings is hilarious, because it's an outdated fashion. Imagine the most joyless, uptight, self-important middle-aged dude trying to get the pants of a 25-year-old woman. So to win her over, he shows up with a mullet and a pair of mirrored Oakleys. Malvolio's got it coming, no doubt about it, but it's really surprising on this note of needing Malvolio in order to bring about reconciliation. But I see it like this. If we're going to find any ways forward in all of this, there's going to have to be a way to reconcile even with those Puritans. If we can't, there's civil war on the horizon. When it comes to making things right with Malvolio, there are two important things. At the end of the play, Malvolio storms out. I'll be revenged on the whole pack of you. But instead of getting all bent out of shape, Olivia just says, he hath been most notoriously abused. She acknowledges that he's been misused and humiliated. She doesn't say he's right, or that he has a right to revenge, but she still shows him sympathy. Still, she doesn't let his threats overrule the sense of joy at the play's end, but she does recognize the grievance. The second thing is this. Orsino sends someone, Fabian, one of Sir Toby's buddies, to go after him. He says, pursue him and entreat him to a peace. Now hear me on this because it's really important. The peace process with the narcissist Malvolio doesn't happen in public, doesn't happen on the stage where he can perform anything. This is the way with narcissist charlatans. They need to be removed from the stage, taken away from those poisonous positions of power and authority, but for our own good, we need to learn how to invite them back in with everyone else. If we're going to move forward, if any reconciliation is going to work, and if our reconciliation ever has hope to get past just repeating the status quo of cultural authority and social expectation, we need to learn how to reform the Malvolios. But that always happens off stage, where there's no applause, where there's no one to impress. Look, reconciliation can't stop with just the people that we like. But we can't also let the killjoy ruin the wedding.